So I was calling this session from wrestling with sovereignty to embracing it. And I included the word wrestling in the title for a reason. Sovereignty is a difficult subject to get to grips with because it runs counter to many of our cultural and religious beliefs. Counter to how we think things work, or at least how we think they ought to work. And it's Ali's fault, really. She nudged me into my thinking into this space by making a comment during our discussions about marriage as we prepared for the 2 podcast style talks that we did here at our church in April. Because she pointed out this paradox. So in theory, we both believe that if you're a healthy person, you could marry any one of quite a few other healthy people and have a great marriage. So the whole fear that comes from finding the one seems to be a bit unhelpful and unnecessary. However, on the other hand, when we look at how we met, dated, got saved and married, it seems clear that the Lord's hand was in all of that, bringing us together. So how does that work? I don't know. It's a mystery. It's like looking at something from 2 completely different angles. Some people would say the same thing is true with salvation. From here, we understand for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. But from eternity, we'll also understand, as Ephesians 1:4 puts it, he chose us in him before the foundation of the world. How does that work? I don't know. Anyway, Ali's comment got me thinking more deeply about the subject of the sovereignty of God. And I've had a growing suspicion over a period of time that we place far too much importance on our free will and far too little on his sovereignty. And the reality is that people generally don't like his sovereignty. People generally don't like God's sovereignty. His sovereignty is behind much striving, frustration, and disappointment among believers, and much anger, rage, and violence among non-believers. So let's just take a second to create a loose definition of sovereignty. I think of sovereignty this way. Sovereignty is when God goes parental. And he goes parental. And he makes a decision. And when you argue with him, the only thing he says is, because I said so. That is God exercising his sovereignty. It's when he sets boundaries and limits and he decides to act for his own reasons. But in my way of thinking, it falls short of control. And most of the time when I hear the phrase, God is in control, I wince a little bit. It seems to me that that's well intended but misguided. What exactly is God in control of? Even as a believer, would you say God is in control of your words, your thoughts, your actions 100% of the time? What about people who don't even like God? People who hate him? Is he in control of their every action? What about the devil? Is God somehow the devil's puppet master? So I'm not suggesting that the Father cannot intervene to establish his will whenever he decides to. I mean, again, we believe in the incarnation, right? Which is God intervening in real time, establishing his kingdom. But that kind of reinforces my point. Jesus brought the kingdom to overthrow what already existed. And it seems obvious that while the kingdom of God has continued to grow and expand across the earth since that time, it has not been established completely and to the maximum extent possible. Also, I certainly believe that he steers both individuals, especially those of us who are willing to receive his steering, and that he's steering the unfolding of history. You see, we might stand at the edge of an ocean, and as we stand at the edge of the ocean, we might look up, and one time we might stand there, we might see that the tide is in, and then we might come back later on that day and see that the tide is out. So if we're judging just in the moment, the tide is in, the tide is out, things change a lot fast. But over the course of a few hundred years, those waves are going to erode that cliff. That's just how it's going to go, right? And so I think the sovereignty of God is, over the long haul, God is going to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. And that detail of the in and out of the tide is going to cause it to happen. But all the stuff, that might have some variables left in it. That might have some space left in it. That might have some things where you personally or someone else takes a bunny trail you didn't need to take, and God weaves it back in and still brings it back around. So, when we're thinking about the sovereignty of God, we're thinking about those moments where he decides to intervene or not for his own purposes. You see, I don't think that God's sovereignty is the same thing as fate. Right? That whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and that's all there is to it. But I do believe ultimately the outcome is fixed. The Father determined when Jesus would arrive, and he's determined when he will return. Galatians 4:4 says, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son." And Matthew 24:36, talking about the return of Jesus, says, "But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only." He's already decided when it's going to happen. I like to say it this way: we can't change the outcome. Jesus is coming back at the set time. But I think we can change the score. I think we can change the score. I think our lives and our witness can be used to bring more people or less people into the kingdom of God. Otherwise, I kind of fail to see the point. If we can't change anything, then what is any of this about? And God's sovereignty, his deciding, his steering, his intervening, isn't just true of Jesus and these really big things. Proverbs 16 verse 9 says, "A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps." And it's clear when we read the Old Testament, he certainly maneuvers people into position, doesn't he? I mean, think of Joseph or Moses or Esther. Joseph was sold as a slave and convicted as an attempted rapist before he was put in charge of a nation and able to save and protect the beginnings of the people of Israel. Moses survives as a baby, is raised in Pharaoh's household, and then trained as a shepherd to navigate around the wilderness before he's ever sent to deliver Israel. Esther was placed into the king's palace and chosen as the new queen. When I look at all those things, I think, was there a plan B? Was there a plan B? And honestly, it doesn't look like it, does it? I mean, there isn't anyone else who has been remotely prepared in the same way that those three were prepared for this, what God was about to bring them into. God took 80 years to prepare Moses, 40 in Pharaoh's household, 40 in the wilderness, to get him ready to do what he was going to do. There wasn't anybody else who had anything remotely like that as their resume. That was just him. So it doesn't look like there was a plan B. Did they get a vote? I mean, it doesn't really look like it. It doesn't really look like it. Because Joseph surely would have opted out during the slavery and prison years. Moses argues with the Lord about it, and Esther needs some convincing from Mordecai. But the Father sovereignly chooses certain people for certain tasks at certain times. And if I think about myself and how my life's played out, I would say that most of the time when it comes to ministry assignments, the Father gives me invitations rather than commands. So like when Ali and I travel to another country or to another church or something, it's like he's saying, do you want to come along? I'm going over here. But it's not a command, it's an invitation. On the other hand, And so I think with those, we can say yes to one or no to the other or whatever, and not actually be out his will. But I don't think that I chose to be a preacher, then a pastor, and now one who's beginning to impart the Father's love. I don't think I got voted that. I think that was what he decided. That was his choosing and preparing and steering. Like the song we did at the beginning, that Sovereign Over Us, I love saying we had an Indian daughter called Linta, and she used to sing that song, and her tagline for it that she had was, "When my waiting meets his promise." When my waiting meets his promise. And it's sort of, when I'm thinking about the sovereignty of God, there's this thing of saying, when my choosing meets his steering. Because he's good at putting us into a place where we'll make the choice he wants us to make. And I'd like to think that I would do what God asked me to do, regardless of what it was and regardless of when he said it. But sometimes he allows circumstances to stack up in a certain way so that you should make the choice, and so that it impacts the timing. Anyway, more on all of that later. Moses was given some insight into God's sovereignty in Exodus 33:18 and 19. We read this: Moses said, "Please show me your glory." And he, that's the Lord, said, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy." So God is revealing his nature, and he says, I'll be gracious to whoever I want, and I will be compassionate to whoever I want. And I think the Father here is describing himself, how he's going to operate, who he is, what he does. And he's basically sort of saying, that's who I am, that's what I do, and I'm not up for discussion about it. And in the abstract, all of that sounds fine. Especially it sounds fine if you see yourself as one who's been shown mercy. Then you're like, okay, hey, I'm good with this.
Right.
But in practice, people are often highly offended by the sovereignty of God. Listen to Luke chapter 4, 25 to 29. This is when Jesus returned to his hometown of Nazareth. Luke chapter 4, 25 to 29. "But in truth I tell you," this is Jesus speaking, "in truth I tell you, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heavens were shut up 3 years and 6 months, and a great famine came over all the land. And Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And there were many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. When they had heard these things, all in the synagogue were filled with wrath, and they rose up and drove him out of the town and brought him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built, and so that they could throw him down the cliff." The mere mention of God exercising his sovereignty and deciding who he's going to show mercy to and who he's not going to show mercy to got people so angry that they want to kill Jesus, God in the flesh, right there and right there. And there's so much anger and rage in our culture that is directed towards the sovereignty of God. I mean, why does the world care so much about, 15, 20 million people having perhaps 0.5% of the world's landmass? Talking about the Jews in Israel. Why is everyone so bent out of shape by that?
Right.
Because God said, here's how it is. You don't get a vote on it. I'm giving this piece of land to this group of people, and your opinion doesn't matter to me. That's why people are so bent out of shape. So much rage against God is rooted right here. People really don't like the way he does things. And then there's this parable that Jesus tells in Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 to 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, so that was a day's wage for a day laborer type job, he sent them to his vineyard. And going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, you go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you. So they went. Going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same. At about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing, and he said to them, why do you stand here idle all day? They said to him, because no one has hired us. He said to them, you go into the vineyard too. And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to the foreman, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius, so they got a full day's pay. Now when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, these last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. But he replied to one of them, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to the last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first and the first will be last. It's not hard to imagine those exact same reactions today, is it? It's not hard to imagine those exact same reactions. I worked 12 hours. He only worked 1, and you're paying us the same. You see, from the side of earning, that makes perfect sense. But from the side of grace, it doesn't make any sense. Because grace and earning are opposites. If you're in an earning relationship with God, then you will become enraged when you observe a grace relationship close up. As a servant, your core belief is summarized as, if I do A, God is obligated to do B. That's how it works. That is how all of it works. I do this, God does that. But as a son or daughter, your core belief is, God is my Father. He relates to me with love and kindness and generosity out of his own free will. And that's how it works. That's how all of it works. When a servant sees a son or daughter receive by grace what he or she thinks they have earned by merit, it gets ugly. Say that again. When a servant sees a son or daughter receive by grace what he or she thinks they have earned by merit, it gets ugly. That's a good summary statement of the Gospels right there. You see, until there's transformation from earning as a servant to receiving as a son or daughter, the only choice the servant has is to try harder or to give up. Yeah. Those are the only two options on the table. And in church, this trying harder often translates to following a formula. And both the church and the world, there's a love in this last, 20, 30, 40 years of the sort of how-to type books. I remember hearing an author talk a few years ago, and he said he was desperately trying to get a book published, and no one would publish it until they made him give it a how-to title, like, how to get God to answer your prayers, or 7 steps to do this, or 12 ways of doing such and such. Until he would frame it that way, they wouldn't give him the book deal. And there's a love of that kind of thing. Just tell me what to do to get the outcome I want. And so we read another book and we try another formula, and generally it doesn't work at all. Generally it doesn't work at all. Gets us nowhere. And in a secular context, the how-to books make sense to me, because I don't expect them to factor in God, let alone his sovereignty. But in church, it's amazing to me that his sovereignty still isn't factored in hardly at all. I mean, listen, you can't just copy someone else's methods and get identical results. Right. This is life, not a science experiment. We can learn from others, but the Father won't let us get away with just copying them. I can't go to the same church, preach the same message, say the same prayers, wear the same clothes as Smith Wigglesworth or Jonathan Edwards and see the same things happen as happened to them. Because I'm not them. You see, the how-to approach ignores all sorts of things like your personality, your maturity, your giftings, your calling, your context, the timing. Let me just put some examples around that. So if you think historically, we'll have one historical example, one current example. So historically, when I was in Bible school, I did a preaching class, and of course at the end we had to preach to the rest of the class, and everyone had an evaluation form, and they had to say, you know, you didn't look at me enough, and you didn't pause long enough, and you know, whatever it was. And so I chose to preach about faithfulness versus fruitfulness. And I contrasted the most and least successful preachers in the Bible. And it's interesting right out the gate that Jesus is not the most successful preacher in the Bible. In terms of what we can see, right? Sure. Anyone know who the two were? That hasn't already heard me say this. So the most successful preacher in the Bible is Jonah, right? He preaches for one day, 120,000 people get saved. The least successful preacher in the Bible is Noah. He preaches for 100 years and 7 people get saved, and they're his family. So being slightly nerdy at times, I did a little calculation. So to the nearest million, Jonah was 626 million times more effective than Noah. One day, 120,000 people, 100 years, 7 people. Yet if you read the Old Testament, what you find is that Noah is held in higher regard than Jonah. Like there's 2 or 3 places in the Old Testament where something is going on in Israel and they've been in such a place of rebellion against God, and the word of the Lord comes, even if you bring in so-and-so, so-and-so, and Noah to intercede for you, I'm still going to say no. That's how bad you guys have been, is even if you bring in Noah, I'm still saying no. So what do we do with that? What do we do with Jonah walks into town on day 1, preaches, the whole place goes into revival and everyone gets saved? Noah preaches for 100 years and everybody tunes him out the entire time except his family, and who knows, you know, whether he just arm twisted them hard enough as you can do in a family context, and everyone's like, I think he's an idiot, but I'll get on the boat. Or a modern example might be this. In the last 25 years, far more Muslims have come to faith in Jesus than in the entire 1400-year history of Islam prior to that. Was that because the missionaries who were in those parts of the world today suddenly discovered the magic formula? Or was it because God sovereignly decided it was time? And, you know, were all the missionaries for 1400 years just really bad missionaries? You know, the ones that were there for decades and didn't see any fruit,
Right.
which was common. You see, we've got to have a tendency to overestimate our part and underestimate his part, his ways, his time. And I'd suggest that leads us into a whole heap of unnecessary striving and earning and performing and comparing and frustration. In a world obsessed with equality, can we embrace our inequalities, our uniqueness? I mean, I realized years ago that in the name of diversity, we're actually being led into sameness. And culturally, rather than embrace our strengths as an opportunity to give and our weaknesses as an opportunity to receive, we want to create equal outcomes for everybody in every situation. And that mindset inherently believes that the Father got it wrong. That mindset inherently believes that the Father got it wrong. That he should have made us all equally intelligent, equally athletic, equally musical, equally good looking, equally you name it. And so it sets out to correct his errors. It is inherently an antichrist spirit that drives the bus. Because for that to be true, furthermore, it believes that we should have the same opportunities. And for all of that to be true, we would have to be born into identical families and identical cultures in identical cities where we could have identical educations, live in identical houses and have identical experiences. And yet the Father values creativity and differences so much that no two people have the same fingerprints and no two snowflakes are the same. It's so different. I mean, seriously, the biggest lie that's been told in the United States the last, 30, 40 years is you can be anything you want to be. No, you can't. You can only be one of two things. You can be who the Father made you to be, or you can be frustrated. That's your choices. Speaking of spiritual gifts in the church, Paul writes this in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, beginning at verse 11. All these, he's speaking about spiritual gifts, all these are empowered by one and the same Spirit who apportions to each one individually as he wills. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all of the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all were made to drink of one Spirit. For the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would be the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you. Nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And on those parts of the body that we think less honourable, we bestow the greater honour. And on our unpresentable parts are treated with greater modesty, which our more presentable parts do not require. But God has so composed the body, giving greater honour to the part that lacked it, that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honoured, all rejoice together. Now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it. And God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, then gifts of healing, helping, administrating in various kinds of tongues. So this passage teaches us quite a lot about the ways of God. Verse 11, the Holy Spirit gives each one gifts as he decides. Verse 18, the members of the body are arranged as he chooses. Verse 28, the leaders are appointed as he determines. At every point is God's sovereign choosing, not our earning. This is not a public corporation. You cannot legitimately work your way up into a position that he has not gifted you for, called you into, or appointed you to. Our place is to discover our place, to grow secure in it, feeling neither inferior nor superior to others. And from there will be a blessing to others and bring glory to the Father. You see, many people have stumbled because they have stepped beyond the grace and the calling that he's given to them. Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest reasons for these high-speed come aparts you see in ministry is people get out of their calling. They start to push into some area that God isn't inviting them into. And they don't have grace for it. Right. You know, I was talking to somebody the other day. It was really interesting to me. I remember a few years ago, somebody came to me while I was pastoring. They asked me a question, and we sat, we talked, and I gave them a horrible answer to the question. And I remember thinking at the time, this is a useless answer. And a couple of weeks later, I was teaching. And as I was teaching, because I have grace in the teaching environment that I don't have in the counselling environment, I gave a brilliant answer to their question. And they were happened to be there, and I went to them afterwards and went, that's the answer I should have given you 2 weeks ago. And they went, yeah, I know. You see, if the Father has not gifted you, called you, and appointed you to be a pastor or a prophet or an evangelist or anything else, no amount of prayer, fasting, and Bible study is going to turn you into one. So what I want to do, I just want to take about 10 minutes now, and I just want to give you a little bit of processing time with this, to have a little bit of a dialogue with the Father about this stuff. So you could do this 2 ways, I think. You can look at it sort of historically, and you might say, Father, show me where you were steering me from behind the scenes and I never noticed. You can ask that kind of a question. Or you can do it in a present tense, and that might be looking at, asking him to show you where are the boundaries and the permissions. Where is there a wall and where is there a door? Now, what is it which gifts and callings and places and positions are off limits to me, at least at this time? And which ones are open to me at this time? Which ones are you inviting me into? Right? Because, most of the time when we're seeking gifts and we're seeking different things, it's because God's put it in our heart, and that's great. But sometimes we have stuff in our heart that's there, not because He stirred it, but because somebody has put that expectation on us, or we think that something is better than something else, so we want that, not the thing that we were actually being offered, right? And so what I'm just encouraging you to do, just take the next 10 minutes or so and just have a little bit of a conversation with the Father around some of that. Just show me where I'm maybe I'm banging on this one door and He's going, if you turn around, there's another door right there, it's wide open. You can walk right through that. This one you're going to be knocking on for a long time. So what would you rather do? Be stuck looking at the door that's closed, or go through the one that's open? So take about 10 minutes or so, then we'll come back and wrap things up.